The first thing I noticed was his hand on my arm. Not a tap. Not an accidental brush in a narrow aisle. He grabbed my forearm the way someone grabs you when they're trying to stop you from stepping into traffic. Firm, urgent, a little desperate. I had just set a bottle of Tylenol on the counter at Richmond Family Pharmacy and was reaching into my purse for my insurance card when it happened. I looked up. It was the pharmacist, Frank DeLuca. I'd been coming to that pharmacy for 11 years. He knew my name, knew I took a low-dose blood pressure medication, knew my late husband Roy had picked up his heart prescriptions there every month, until the month he didn't anymore. Frank is not a dramatic man. He wears the same style of beige cardigan every day and speaks in a measured tone that makes everything sound like a side effect disclosure. So when he looked past me at the front door, then back at me, and said in a voice barely above a whisper, "Iris, does your son know who he's really dealing with?" I felt something cold move through my chest. I didn't answer right away. I didn't know how to. He let go of my arm. He straightened up and said, louder for the benefit of no one in particular, "I'll get that ready for you in just a moment." Then he slid a folded piece of paper across the counter and walked to the back. I stood there for a moment. A woman behind me was scrolling on her phone. The little TV in the corner was playing a segment about fall foliage in Vermont. Everything was completely normal except for the piece of paper sitting under my palm and the feeling that the floor had shifted 2 inches to the left. I took the paper. I didn't open it there. I paid for my Tylenol and walked out to my car, and I sat in the parking lot of the Ridgemont Strip Mall with the heat running because it was mid-October, and Ohio in October does not forgive you for wearing only a cardigan, and I unfolded it. It was a name, a date, and a prescription number that wasn't mine. My son's name is Colin. He's 34 years old, and he has his father's eyes and his father's stubbornness, and, unfortunately, his father's habit of deciding he's made up his mind before he's actually thought something through. Roy was the same way. It used to drive me to the edge of sanity when we were young. Later, I found it charming. That's what love does. It reclassifies everything. Colin works in commercial real estate. He's good at it, better than he gives himself credit for. After his divorce from his first wife 4 years ago, he went quiet for a long time. Didn't date, barely called. I drove the 40 minutes to his apartment in Westerville every couple of weeks and brought him food he didn't ask for, and we'd watch old baseball games and not talk about anything real, and that was enough for both of us. Then, about 10 months ago, he called me on a Sunday afternoon, which he almost never does, and his voice had a different quality to it. Lighter, like something had been set down. "Mom," he said, "I want you to meet someone." Her name was Tanya. Tanya Keller. She was 31. A dental hygienist, she said, from a town outside of Dayton. She had auburn hair and a laugh that came easily, and she looked at my son the way I used to hope someone would look at him. I liked her. I want to be honest about that because it matters. I genuinely liked her at first. I thought she was good for him. I thought the way she touched his arm when she talked to him meant something real. I found out later that some people are very good at making you think that. The prescription number Frank gave me was filled under the name Sandra Keller, same last name as Tanya. I didn't know what to do with that at first. I sat with it for 2 days. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself Frank might have made a mistake, might have seen something he misunderstood. I told myself Colin was a grown man and I needed to respect that and not be the kind of mother who made everything about her own anxiety. I told myself a lot of things. On the 3rd day, I drove back to the pharmacy. Frank was behind the counter alone. I waited until the one other customer left, and then I walked up, and I said, quietly, "Tell me what you saw." He hesitated. I could see him working through it. The privacy considerations, the liability, the professional line, he was aware he had already come close to crossing. But Frank DeLuca had known me for 11 years, and he had known Roy. And I think what he said next, he said because he was a decent man who could not unknow what he knew. "The young woman who comes in with your son," he said. "She's been filling prescriptions here for about 8 months, but the name on her account doesn't match the name she gives at the counter. She gives the name Tanya. The account name is Sandra. Different date of birth, different address." He paused. "Iris, I've been doing this a long time. People mix things up sometimes, but this has happened 4 times. Same woman, same pattern." I gripped the edge of the counter. The medications, I said. What kind? He shook his head. I can't tell you that. He didn't need to. The fact that he'd said anything at all told me enough about how worried he was. I want to tell you that I went home and calmly made a plan. That I was rational and methodical and handled it the way a sensible woman of 63 should handle something like this. But what I actually did was sit in my kitchen for an hour and a half and drink 2 cups of coffee I didn't need and pick up my phone to call Colin 4 separate times without actually calling. Because here's the thing about being a mother. You don't just worry about your child's safety. You worry about the moment they realize they've been deceived. You worry about what that does to a person who already had his heart broken once and came back from it slowly, the way a plant comes back from a drought. Alive, yes, but more careful than before. Colin had opened himself back up. If I was wrong about this, I would do damage I couldn't undo. And if I was right, well, that damage had already been done by someone else. And what I had to do now was manage how much worse it got. I didn't call him. Not yet. I started carefully. I'm not going to dress it up as anything other than what it was. I looked her up. I spent an evening doing the kind of searching a person does when they're hoping to be proven wrong. Facebook, LinkedIn, public records. I searched Tanya Keller from Dayton, Ohio, and I found what you'd expect to find. A profile with a few years of photos. A job listed, mutual connections with my son. Then I searched Sandra Keller. The results took a few seconds to load, and when they did, I felt the particular nausea of realizing your worst suspicion was underdressed for the occasion. Sandra Keller, 31, had a civil judgment against her from Franklin County from 2 years ago. Debt collection, credit card fraud. There was a second filing, older, from a county in Indiana. A different address, a different employer listed. 2 identities, 2 histories, the same face. I printed everything out. I don't entirely trust information to stay where you put it when it lives only on a screen. I thought about going to Colin immediately. I really did. But I remembered, and this was something that nagged at me for days, that 2 weeks before this, Colin had mentioned casually that Tanya had suggested he look into refinancing his condo. Streamline it, she'd said. According to him, free up some equity. He'd said it like it was something he was considering. He'd said she had a friend in lending who could give him a good rate. The condo was paid off. Roy and I helped Colin with the down payment when he bought it, and he'd finished paying it off 18 months ago. It was the one thing he owned outright. I set my printed pages on the kitchen table, and I sat there looking at them, and I thought about what it meant that someone who did not actually exist under the name she'd given my son was suggesting he take out a loan against the only asset he owned free and clear. I thought about the families Frank had not mentioned but that I was now imagining. Other sons, other mothers who had sat in other kitchens and not known what I was sitting here knowing. I called my friend Ruth Ann. Ruth Ann's ex-husband was a defense attorney in Columbus for 25 years, and she knows more about how legal situations work than most people would ever want to. I didn't tell her everything. I told her enough. She said, "Iris, what you have right now is a pattern. That's not nothing. But patterns don't protect your son's condo. Evidence does." She told me what to look for. She told me not to confront Tanya alone. She told me, gently but clearly, that if Colin was already emotionally involved, and from what she knew of my son he was, the conversation I had with him needed to happen after I had something solid, not before, or I risked him defending her before he'd seen the truth himself. I hated that she was right. I am not a dramatic woman. I want to be clear about that. I worked as an administrative coordinator for a school district for 22 years. I organized things. I filed things. I made sure the right information got to the right people at the right time. That was my skill set, and I applied it here the way I would have applied it to anything else, methodically, without flair. I found Sandra Keller's real address. It took me 4 days and a subscription to one of those people finder websites that I felt vaguely ashamed about using and will probably cancel next month. It was an apartment in Dublin, the Dublin just outside Columbus, in the well-kept suburbs, where the streets are named after English villagers and everyone has a Ring doorbell. Not a struggling address, not a desperate one. That gave me pause. This was not someone acting out of poverty or crisis. This was a choice repeated. I drove to the apartment complex on a Wednesday morning. I didn't get out of the car. I just wanted to see the place. I'm not sure what I expected. Some confirmation visible from the parking lot, some obvious sign. What I found instead was a black Audi registered, I'd later discover, to a name I didn't recognize. A third name, which meant there was more here than I'd understood. I drove home. I called Ruth Ann again. She said, "Stop going there alone." 3 weeks into all of this, Tanya called me. She called me on a Tuesday evening, which was already strange because we didn't have the kind of relationship where she called me independently. She'd always reach me through Colin. But my number was in her phone, apparently, from when Colin had shared contact information early on. She called me, and she was warm and easy, and she said she was hoping we could do lunch, just the two of us, get to know each other a little better. She said Colin talked about me all the time. She said she wanted me to feel comfortable with her. I said yes. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that was foolish. A few people would have said the same thing. But I said yes because I needed to see her face when she talked to me without Colin in the room. I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with. We met at an Italian restaurant in Worthington called Trattoria Rustica. Her suggestion, a place nicer than I would have chosen, with cloth napkins and a wine list. She was already there when I arrived. She stood up and hugged me like we were old friends. I hugged her back. I sat down. I unfolded my napkin. For the first 40 minutes, I let her lead the conversation. She was good at it. She knew how to ask questions that felt personal without being intrusive. She asked about Roy, how long we'd been married, whether I missed him. She asked about my work before I retired. She laughed at the right moments. She touched my hand once when I mentioned Roy's last year, and her expression arranged itself perfectly into something that looked like compassion. Then she said something I wasn't ready for. "I know this is fast," she said. "Colin and I moving in the direction we're moving. I know that might feel like a lot, with everything he went through before. I just want you to know that my intentions are real." I looked at her. "What direction is that?" I asked. She smiled. "We've been talking about taking the next step. Financially, I mean as a couple, having a shared foundation. It's something Colin wants." I nodded slowly. "That's exciting," I said. "For both of you." I came home and sat in my car in the garage for a while. Financially, a shared foundation, my son's paid-off condo, his retirement account. My son's paid-off condo, his retirement account, his name on a joint application with a woman who had 2 identities and a civil judgment she'd been running from for 2 years. I called Ruth Ann at 8 o'clock that night. I told her everything from lunch. There was a pause on the line. "Iris," she said, "it's time." I went to Colin on a Saturday. I brought everything printed out. The civil judgments, the prescription records Frank had quietly confirmed in writing after I'd asked him directly and explained what was at stake. The people finder results, the third name on the Audi registration. I laid it on his kitchen table the same way I'd laid it on mine. I let him look. He didn't say anything for a long time. I watched him go through it page by page. His face cycled through something I recognized from when he was a boy and had discovered something that reorganized his understanding of the world. A stillness first, then a kind of controlled breath, then the jaw setting. "Mom," he finally said. "I know," I said. "How long have you had this?" "About 6 weeks." He looked up. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" I told him the truth. "Because I needed you to see it, not just hear it from me. If I'd come to you with questions, you would have asked her, and she would have had an answer, and she would have had an answer. She's very good at answers." He looked back down at the papers. I watched him reread something. Then he said very quietly, "She mentioned the refinancing again last week. Said her friend could have paperwork ready by the end of the month." Neither of us said anything for a moment. "Colin," I said, "I need you to hear me. I'm not here because I want to control anything. I'm here because your father's not here to sit next to me at this table, and this is the only thing I have left to protect." He folded his hands on the papers. He nodded once. He didn't cry, but he was close to it, and I didn't push. He didn't confront her that day. I asked him not to. We talked through it. Ruth Ann's advice, the options. You could go to the district attorney's office. You could file a report with the Ohio Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. You could consult a family law attorney. Colin was quiet through all of it. He asked me to leave the papers with him. I left them. He called Tanya that evening and told her he needed space. He didn't explain. She called back twice. She texted. The text started warm and got sharper over the course of an hour, which told me something about what happened when the script she'd been running didn't get the expected response. On Monday, Colin went to the Franklin County Courthouse with a friend of Ruth Ann's, a retired attorney who did this as a favor, and filed a formal complaint. He also contacted the Ohio Pharmacy Board with Frank's written account. Frank, to his credit, had documented everything properly. He said, when I thanked him, I almost didn't say anything. I kept thinking it wasn't my place. He paused. I'm glad I did. I told him I was glad too. The investigation that followed was not dramatic in the way investigations are on television. It was paperwork. It was waiting. It was a phone call in late November from a number with a Columbus area code telling Colin that Sandra Keller, which was in fact her legal name, Tanya Keller was the constructed identity, had been identified in connection with 2 other financial fraud cases in central Ohio. There were other families, other sons, as it turned out. 2 of them. I thought about those other mothers. I wondered if any of them had had a Frank DeLuca. It is February now. The case is still moving through the system, which is how these things work. Slowly, without the clean resolution a story is supposed to have. Colin is doing what he does when he's hurt. He is quiet and he is working, and he comes to my house on Sunday afternoons, and we watch basketball now instead of baseball because it's the right season for it, and we don't talk about everything yet, but we will. Last week he brought me a plant for my kitchen windowsill, a small succulent in a terracotta pot. He said, "You kept mentioning the windowsill looked empty." I hadn't mentioned it in months. He'd remembered anyway. I put it in the spot where the light hits in the afternoon, and I stood there looking at it for a moment, thinking about Roy, thinking about Colin at 8 years old, bringing me dandelions from the backyard like they were something precious, thinking about how little I was prepared for any of the specific griefs and specific joys that motherhood turned out to involve. I did not fix everything. The case is ongoing. Colin still has a long road to whatever comes after a thing like this. There are mornings, I think, where he wakes up and the specific shape of what happened to him settles back in, and he has to decide all over again to get out of bed. I know that because it is also what I did after Roy died, and the fact that he does it anyway, gets up, goes to work, shows up on Sunday, remembers the windowsill, tells me that my son is going to be okay in the ways that matter. I am 63 years old. I live alone in a house in Westerville, Ohio, with a succulent on the kitchen windowsill and a prescription account at Ridgemont Family Pharmacy, where Frank DeLuca wears a beige cardigan, and once, on an ordinary Tuesday, decided it was his place after all. I am grateful every day that he did. People ask me sometimes if I feel guilty, if I crossed a line, if a mother is supposed to let her grown son make his own mistakes and live with them. I've thought about that a lot over the past few months. I don't have a clean answer, but I have an honest one. What happened to Colin didn't happen because he was foolish. It happened because he was open, because after years of being careful and closed off, he decided to trust someone again. And she saw that openness and calculated exactly how far she could walk through it before he noticed the door was being used. That's not a failure of his judgment. That's what happens when a person with bad intentions meets a person trying to be good. The fault runs in one direction only. But here's what I keep coming back to. The outcome of this story was never guaranteed. Frank could have said nothing. He almost did. Ruth Ann could have told me to stay out of it. I could have talked myself out of every step I took, and I tried to, more than once. What made the difference wasn't luck. It was a series of small decisions by ordinary people who decided that knowing something and doing nothing were not the same as being neutral. Frank knew something. He chose discomfort over silence. That choice cost him nothing and protected everything. I think about that when people talk about integrity like it's a grand gesture. It almost never is. It's a pharmacist in a beige cardigan deciding on a Tuesday that it's his place after all. For Colin, I think the hardest part isn't the betrayal itself. It's the recalibration. The slow, quiet work of figuring out how much of yourself to keep open when experience has just handed you a reason to close back up. He's doing that work. I see it on Sunday afternoons. He doesn't talk about it much, and I don't push, Because I know from my own life that the most important work a person does rarely has words attached to it while it's happening. What I want him to carry forward, what I hope this whole thing leaves in him instead of just a scar, is the understanding that intelligence without courage is incomplete. He could have known everything I knew and still done nothing, because knowing is easy and acting on it is not. The hard part isn't finding the truth. The hard part is deciding that the truth obligates you to something, that what you know changes what you're responsible for. He filed that complaint himself. He made the calls. He sat with it for a week before he said a single word to her, and when he finally did, he was measured and clear. That's not something I taught him in the last few months. That's who he is. I just made sure he had the full picture before he had to decide what to do with it. I am not a perfect mother. Roy would tell you that, gently, with a smile, because he was that kind of man. I have overstepped. I have underestimated. I have in the past confused protecting my son with managing him, and those are very different things. But this time, I think I got it right. I came to him with evidence, not opinion. I gave him the choice. I let him be the one to act. That's the only version of this I could live with. The succulent is still on the windowsill. It's doing well, actually. Turns out they're harder to kill than you'd think.